Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Sorry for the confusion. Today is, in fact, a video lecture day. So today I want to take a look at the Navajo creation myth. So one thing I wanted to do with this class, and one thing I've tried to improve on compared to previous versions of this course, is to have more of a perspective outside the sort of Greek and Roman one. And so what I wanted to do is bring in perspectives from diverse parts of the world. And one of the ones that we're going to look at is the Native American creation myth of the Navajo. We're also going to be looking at some other Native American creation myths. The chapter of the book, which is, let's see, chapter 8, it contains a lot of different stories, and we'll see kind of the relationships between them. I had you guys just read the part that's the Navajo creation myth, the Dine Bahane. But if you, if you want to read some of the other ones too, it could be very illuminating as well. Some of them are summarized, some of them are discussed in a little bit more detail. I'm going to touch on all of them today, but especially to touch on the Navajo one. So these are creation myths from a very different part of the world, isolated for a long period of time from Europe, Africa, and Asia, due to Native American cultures coming over on the Bering Strait land bridge, and then being isolated after that when that land bridge disappears as as water kind of fills up that area. But there are some, even now we can still connect some cultural connections between Native Americans and other parts of the world. For instance, a lot of European and Asian mythologies have some sort of notion of the Great Dipper as a great bear, despite the fact that that makes no sense because bears don't have tails. Well, in many Native American cultures, they also have the idea that this constellation represents a bear. So it's possible that some cultural connections could have continued. But that said, it's very hard to nail down definitively because this would have happened, 10,000 years ago at least. So we have to be careful about, jumping to conclusions about, cultural connections. Instead, what we have is an opportunity to take these myths kind of on their own terms and see, what's unique about them and how are they different from European myths. And we'll also see the similarities that they have with each other, which is based on a much closer proximity and more recent proximity. So lots to think about there in terms of the background. But yeah, without further ado, let's jump on into it. So just double checking that we're still looking at the PowerPoint here. Okay, yeah, so a lot of Native American cultures have some version of what we call the emergence myth. So this is a story where human beings were born in another world, that there have been different worlds throughout the course of history, and human beings had to leave one world for another world, leave the first world for the second world, sometimes as many as like 4 worlds until you finally get to our world. Maybe it'll be implied that our world might not be the last world, or maybe it is definitively the last world. In some versions of the story, especially the ones that are common in the American Southwest, the area of like New Mexico and Arizona, these cultures have a tradition of the idea that other worlds were somehow kind of underground compared to our world. That people basically climbed up the sky, up to the top of the sky in that world, and then they emerged into a new world. And then they did the same thing again and again and again until they finally got to our world, which kind of makes sense in terms of how people think of the sky as a thing in its own right. This is a theme that we're going to see. We saw it a little bit with the idea of the sky as a god who was laying on top of the goddess of the earth. And we're going to see it in other mythologies as well, this idea of the sky as a solid thing. But these people were able to break through the sky of the previous world, and then these are our most distant ancestors, and they finally broke through to the world that we got today. And usually the gods help them make this climb somehow. And sometimes the gods are involved in creating and destroying the old world or recreating the world, something like that. And so it's an origin story of how we came to be here, but it has some more nuance to it as well, with the details of why did we end up in this particular world, and what was wrong in the other worlds. So that's kind of the question, is like, why did the people leave the other world? How did that all go down? Yeah, in addition to the southwestern Native American cultures like the Hopi, the Navajo, and the Zuni, we also see a very similar thing going on in Polynesian culture. They too have the idea of climbing into a new world. So this is the cultures of the Pacific, descended from people who set off from, well, basically the area of Asia and then into Indonesia and Australia and Hawaii. The people like the Maori, all sorts of different people also have the sort of oceanic emergence myth as well. But today specifically, we're going to focus on the Navajo version of the story. So the Navajo version of the story involves four worlds, and the name Dine Bahane could be translated as the story of the people. And so basically, it's the story of how did the people arise from these four different worlds. So if we think back, how does it all start? Well, originally, it was not the people that we know today. It was not modern human beings. It was a different kind of people known as the air spirits or the air spirit people. And what the air spirit people are, if you look closely at what the text is saying, is they are insects. They are like bugs, locusts possibly, grasshoppers, things like that. So they are bug people, but they're treated a lot like people. They have a lot of the same mistakes as people, even though they are supposed to be these spirits of the air who resemble bugs. And so the reason they get kicked out of their first world is because of a mistake. And the mistake is basically that everybody in their community just can't stop cheating on each other. They can't stop committing adultery and breaking their marriage bonds, or the equivalent of marriage bonds as we would understand them. And so this is quite irritating to the other people who live in the first world. And this includes such people as the frog and the heron seem to be sort of guardians of different directions. Another one is the one who grabs things in the water. That's all we know of the name. And so these sort of natural spirits get angry at the air spirit people and say, you must depart this land. We're going to kick you out. And so that's one reason why they leave their original world. But there's another reason as well, which is that they start seeing this flood. So it almost seems like some sort of notion of the gods or the universe decides to punish them or, accelerate the process of kicking them out of their world because there is this flood, this high insurmountable wall of water. So they ultimately do decide to leave their world, but they can't. They can't stop committing adultery. This is kind of a bad habit with them, is not respecting the law, not being able to control themselves. And being able to control yourself is a very important concept in Navajo culture. So they decide to escape the wall of water. And because they're insect people, they can fly. So they escape by flying higher and higher into the air, higher than they've ever flown before, until they finally reach the shell of the sky, and someone calls out to them. And this is someone with a blue head. Seems to be some sort of bird person. So the bird person guides them to the hole, and they go through the hole and they go into the next world. And, they make friends with the bird people there. And this is the blue world. And this is a bird with a blue head. And so now they've gone from, I believe, the black world to the blue world. And so in the blue world, they've got the blue people who live in blue houses and are these blue birds. And they get along great until they start sleeping with the chief of the blue people's wife. So that doesn't work out super well. So they are continuing to run into the same trouble. The blue birds are the swallows, actually. So the swallows, they offend the swallows, and now they are getting kicked out from the swallows. And the swallows say, hey, there's not enough food for all of us anyway, so you better go. And so then they fly up to the top of the sky again, and then they see someone with a white face, and this is a spirit of the wind, and they are guided to a hole where they can climb back up to the third world. And so then they do the same thing in the second world, which is, oddly enough, not white, but yellow. But maybe they're just kind of mixing up the story a little bit by not having the colors of the people match the colors of the worlds. But again, they're expelled for bad behavior. And then finally, they find the last world. And this world is both black and white, which is interesting. It's sort of a mix of colors representing maybe something this time will be different. And it is different in a few ways too, because there's no light. They actually have to create the light themselves. And so this is where they finally end up. And there is a little bit of blue and yellow in this world as well, in the sky. And so there's no sun and moon yet, but they start to get to know this world. They find important peaks, which are the important peaks that the Navajo would know, the important mountains in the four directions. And they meet people who are already there. These people are pretty strange. They do a weird thing where they plant food in the ground. That's right. They farm. So they're these weird farmers. Who has ever heard of something like that? But the farmers teach the Navajo how to farm as well. And we think this might represent the Navajo encountering the Pueblo. They're described as, quote, the people who live in upright houses, which might refer to the special kind of Pueblo kind of dwelling that's kind of carved into these upright houses into sort of a mountain type of a cliff face type of thing. And so they meet the farmers, and they also meet gods here who are called the holy people. So now these become their gods, and we still haven't gotten to human beings yet. So this is all a very long prelude before we get to the human beings. But it's at this point that they start to settle down. They manage to get along well with the Kisani. They kind of make up for their previous mistake where they're breaking the laws of friendship and sleeping with other people's wives. So they don't do that this time. So they've experienced growth. And now are able to have a sort of orderly society, like the Navajo society. And so then they team up with the holy people to create the first humans. And the holy people are not really explained too much who they are. They're just kind of there. They seem to inhabit this world, along with the Kisani. The holy people create the first human beings out of ears of corn. One is black and one is white. You can see the importance of certain colors here. And in the art of the Navajo, these colors generally are used to represent the four different directions, as we see in this map here. And here we see the two different ears of corn. And actually, sorry, I should correct myself. One of the ears of corn is white, but the other one is yellow. So white corn and yellow corn are the important kinds of corn. And so corn is very important to a lot of Native American societies. Native Americans turned corn into a product that humans could eat, and in fact made it grow so well that it can't reproduce without humans. So they domesticated it. So this is an important sort of crop for many, many different cultures. And so here it becomes the first human beings. The ears of corn are transformed into a man and a woman, the first man and the first woman. And it sort of suggests that corn is associated with life, this idea of fertility being this concept of life, which can be life in the growing food sense. It can be life in the giving birth sense. Sometimes they're connected. It can be life in the sort of power of the God sense. We see all those different senses. And so now we have the first man, the first woman. And after this, the air spirit people kind of disappear from the story, which is interesting. But I wonder to what extent, I haven't looked at this myself in super detail, but to what extent the air spirit people are still a part of sort of Navajo stories in terms of like the insect people are to be respected and revered as sort of our most distant ancestors. But now we have the first man, the first woman, and they finally get around to putting some light in the sky. They create the sun and the moon, and they actually have their descendants. They give birth to twins. First a set of twins that are neither male nor female, and then 4 sets of male and female twins. And these children go out super fast, so the population can get off to a good start. And first man and first woman, how do they make the sun and the moon? They make it almost like a work of art. They make round and flat sort of objects, and they decorate them with turquoise, much like the Navajo would do in their own artwork. And so they mix it up with all sorts of things like shells and spring water from 4 different forms and from 4 different directions. And so they put these into the sky. And they give them to an old man and a young man. The sun, a young man carries it around the sky. The moon, an old man carries around the sky. And then finally, as the sun and the moon are going up into the sky, people are sad that they're leaving, but the first man helps everybody feel better and says, hey, you'll see them all the time. They'll be right up there watching over you. And when you die, you will go and join them and help them out, which is a pretty cool concept. But the argument is that it's still too dark. They still need more light. So they decide to create the stars. They make them out of fragments of rock, of mica. And then along comes Coyote. Coyote is another figure who we can call a trickster, very similar to Raven in a lot of Native American mythologies. And so Coyote takes the sort of careful plan that First Man had made for all these stars, and he just takes them and he throws them randomly into the sky. So the constellations are the ones that First Man was able to put into the sky, and then the rest of the stars, Coyote just kind of flung randomly, messing up the whole plan. And so that's the origin story. This is an etiology of how the stars came to be the way they are, as well as the sun and the moon. So basically at that point we have human society with a bunch of generations to keep the population going, and we have the sun and the moon and the stars. And we've gone through this whole process and we've kind of ended up at the modern day. And the world as we would understand it if we were a member of the Navajo people. So yeah, there's a lot going on there. There's cultural contact with the Pueblo. There's some good etiology there. And this sort of repeating pattern of the world not working out the first time, which is something we see in a lot of creation myths. And in a bit, when I talk about creation myths around the world, I want to come back to that. But this is one of the myths where we can think about the ritual component of it quite a lot. A lot of times, this myth is reenacted by drawing out the different corners of the world. And the corners of the world are, again, using these different colors. And also, the different worlds. Going back to this one, we have the different houses in the different worlds. So this is sort of, the shapes are representing the different worlds and the different dwellings that people made. And then we have the origin of the first man and the first woman here as well with the corn. And then we get into something like this, the same set of symbolism is used to kind of draw out where people are. So this is ultimately a map of like the important mountains in the different directions and the location of current settlements, usually drawn out of sand, which is pretty cool. Navajo are sand painters. And so this is giving you a sense of where everything is, but it's also made to look kind of like a person, as if this person was kind of the whole universe. So there's a lot of cool stuff going on there. And we do have a record of some of these rituals. And it's important to bear in mind, actually, especially when we look at Native American stuff, that these are the rituals and the stories as they were recorded by specific, usually white people at specific times, listening to the stories as related by people who are familiar with the culture, trying to preserve the stories and not have them be lost. But it's important to remember that this is only one version of the story. It might change. We might have a completely different context if we were able to hear all the stories and see all the different rituals that were performed all throughout Navajo history. Speaking of rituals, a lot of times these stories would be reenacted with the use of masks. And this is something that is common in a lot of, especially North American cultures, is the use of masks as a performance of the story. So the story is not separate from sort of the performance of it. Even though we might like to read it as a story, in the original context, it would have been something that you associate with this performance. So these masks represent certain members of the holy people who were the gods of the Native Americans, of the Navajo Native American tribes. So we've got the talking god and the monster slayer. These are two of the holy people who might appear in this story. And as sort of the story of human existence goes on, we get into more about these folks and the kind of heroes that they helped inspire and the sort of brave deeds that they did on their own to earn the respect of the people around them. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for now. In the next video, I want to pick up with other myths in the Native American tradition that kind of evoke a very similar set of ideas, and we'll sort of compare them. So I'll see you in that video.